protection, water, and sanitation. The process was assisted and supported technically and funding-wise by the UNICEF. MIX was designed specifically as a tool to generate data for monitoring processes and progress towards national goals and global commitments in the promotion of people's well-being, development, and improvement of children and women in Nigeria, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, otherwise known as the SDGs. The first round in the series of MIX was conducted in 1995. The second and third in 1999 and 2007, while the fourth and fifth rounds were conducted in 2011 and between 2016 and 2017. The fifth round of MIX, that is the one that was conducted in 2016 and 2017, reportedly consolidated on the gains of the four previous ones by incorporating more indicators and models. It also adopted computer-assisted personal interviewing devices, otherwise known as CAPI, which raised the quality of data collected. MIX 5 also introduced pilot testing and the disaggregation of state data up to senatorial districts level. This was aimed at helping to provide data for better planning and programming at the grassroots. MIX has evolved over the years and has expanded from 28 indicators to 200 in the latest round 6, which was conducted between 2021 and 2022. That report, we understand, is now ready for release and implementation. But unlike the previous surveys, round 6 expunged certain modules like water quality, alcohol, and tobacco use, while at the same time introducing new modules such as social transfer, household energy use, and child functioning and foundational learning skills, and a host of other indicators. Now, focus on this edition of the program is on the multiple indicator cluster survey, round 6, and what it holds in stock for socio-economic re-engineering as it affects children and women's health, education, sanitation, use of information and communication technology, and others in the current unstable economic environment. So join us as we try to break down the technicalities of MIX. We'll be with you and we'll be meeting our guests right after now. All right, let's get to meet our guests who are already seated in the studio. First, from my immediate left is Mr. Adeyeye Elutade. He is the head household statistics division of the National Bureau of Statistics. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone.
We're also joined by Peter Hawkins. He is the UNICEF representative in Nigeria. Mr. Hawkins, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here.
Great. Now, Mr. Elutade, help us to understand what the multi-indicator cluster survey is all about. I've tried to explain as much as I could in my introduction, but you are the specialist here. What is the multi-indicator survey?
Thank you so much. Just as you have explained it, multiple indicator cluster survey is a global survey, and it is a survey that is designed to statistically, capture robust estimate from that can be used to assess situation of children and women. It's not only that, it can also help us, it produce data that can as well be used to monitor the progress of sustainable development goals. And when we are talking of assessing situation of children and women, we are looking at the health, education, and other aspects of their lives. So thank you so much.
One question that comes to mind immediately is to ask, why are the men omitted from this cluster survey? It's only this with women and children.
Yes. Initially, when multiple indicator cluster survey started, that was 1995, men were not included, just as you said. But in the last 2 rounds, men were now included. So men are now part of multiple indicator cluster survey. So this last round was the second time we'll be capturing men for multiple.
That's round 6.
Yes, round 6 makes it to be the second time, which means the first time was round 5. So we capture men, and this round again, which is round 6, men were also captured.
Yeah. So Mr. Hawkins, when this cluster survey was instituted in 1995, UNICEF readily came in as technical partners and backed it up with funding. Mm-hmm. What informed that decision by UNICEF? Why was UNICEF so interested in carrying out a cluster survey that dealt at that time with only women and children?
I think the important thing about the multi-indicator cluster survey is that, one, it's global. Here in Nigeria, 1995 was the first one. This is the 6th one. And it's the National Bureau of Statistics that built up the capacity over the years to be able to undertake a cluster survey every 3 years, so that we can understand and get a trajectory of how women, girls and boys are performing within society, or how they are affected by different elements in society. This one is the Multi-Indicator Cluster Survey 2021. Is slightly delayed because of COVID. So the comparison is 2016, which was the last one, which came out in 2017. But it's also in the meantime, we had the DHIS, which is a much bigger survey to be able to compare to. The interesting thing about the Multi-Indicator Cluster Survey 2021 is the first national survey that gives indicators, and there are 200 indicators in that, both at a national level and at a state level, since the outbreak of COVID. So it's our first indicator of how the impact of COVID has had on these 200 indicators. Our initial analysis demonstrates that there has been good progress around things like immunization, access to potable water, sanitation, even in some of the child protection issues around female genital mutilation, child labor and so on. There has been some good progress being made. However, that progress is hidden by the fact there are geographical differences. Say immunization, 57% of children nationally have had access to Penta 3. In a state like Sokoto, only 11% have had access to Penta 3. So the geographical variation is significant here in Nigeria. The second is the demographic growth is exponential. And so while a percentage increase or decrease in one of the indicators would indicate progress, in terms of absolute numbers, the situation is perhaps worse than it was. Child marriage is a good indicator. There has been some progress around child marriage, a reduction in the number of, in the percentage of girls being married under the age of 18, and yet there is probably an increase in the number of girls who have been married under the age of 18. Now, at a global level, that means it puts Nigeria at a higher level on the indicators, usually behind India is the classic comparator, and that will increase. So Nigeria has to make more progress to address the demographic, but it has made good progress in most of the indicators.
Now, what is the age bracket for the children that was, this indicator survey, the age bracket for the children. The women, I understand, I mean, from 1 to maybe infinity, but the children, what's the age bracket that was captured?
There isn't really an age bracket because it depends on the indicator. So if immunization, if you're talking about a specific antigen in immunization, you would have your age bracket there, 0 to 2 years old for that. But there isn't really an age bracket. Children are categorized as under 18. Most of the families that looked at were children with under 5 or under 2, I think it is. So it depends really on the indicator, and then it's extrapolated from there. An example that I might give you is access to education. Primary education will be looking at children of primary education going ages. Junior secondary, about junior secondary going ages, and so on and so forth. So it's about each indicator looking at specific area indicator for itself.
Mr. Luther, he just mentioned, and I think I talked about it much earlier, that the indicator had been increased from 28 initially to 200. Was this simply as a result of the COVID pandemic that this increase came about, or it has progressively increased from 28 at inception in 1995 until now? And what are those new indicators that have now been added, the major ones? So
in the last mix, the major indicators that were captured, we're looking at food insecurity was captured in this last one. It was not in the previous one. We are looking at food, financial inclusion was included in this last one, not in the previous one. We are looking at child functioning was also included in this last one. And foundational skill was also there. Then household energy use was also one of the indicators included in this last round of multiple indicator cluster survey. And even apart from those indicators included, a new questionnaire was also included in this last round of multiple indicator cluster survey. And that questionnaire was for children between the age of 5 to 17 years. So it was not only the indicators that were new in this current multiple indicator cluster survey. Also, we added a new questionnaire, which was used to capture children of 5 to 17 years.
So that, of course, also includes the new modules that you have developed for Mix 6.
Mix 6, yes.
Okay. Now, so let's look at what is really very novel about the cluster survey that should demand the attention of key stakeholders at every level, from local government to state to federal government, especially as the nation, I mean, as Nigeria works towards meeting its commitments of the SDGs in 2030, because it appears that the survey is closely linked to the SDG goals.
Mm-hmm. They are indeed, and multidimensional poverty, which is another sort of generic way of looking at some of these issues. But I think the first thing and the most important is this is the ownership of this data is the National Bureau of Statistics. They are the owner, and they are able to use the statistics and compare it to other statistics that they have to make good analysis and better decisions for the government as a whole. The custodians are the Ministry of Finance, Budget and Planning. So they can look at where are the indicators which are showing the least return, where they can invest more money to get a better return on that investment, especially where you look at issues like human capital, investing in the future of human capital in Nigeria. And the third important client are the state governors and state governments. And all of the multi-indicator cluster survey 2021 indicators are disaggregated by state. So each state can look at its own indicators and compare it to the 2016 one, which can compare it to 2012 one, I think it was, and so on and so forth. So they can look at the trends in their states and where they would like to invest more resources to be able to get a better return on the human capital investment.
There is an aspect of the last question I asked, Mr. Lutade, that was not properly explained. Maybe you could explain it. And that's still talking about the post-COVID era. Well, we can't say it's actually post-COVID because COVID is still very much around. But what are those areas of major concern, especially coming out of the COVID pandemic, that have now been captured in Mix 6?
I think let me use two indicators. One is immunization. There's been an increase from 50% to 57%. That is success in itself, but during COVID period, it's a bigger success in terms that Nigeria, unlike many countries, continue to invest in the routine immunization. And I remember distinctly being at the airport to receive different penta, measles and other vaccines, even at the height of the COVID pandemic. It showed a commitment by the Nigerian government to increased immunization, knowing that increased immunization, routine immunization, would mean that child mortality would start to drop. But that could have been much more if COVID had not happened. But it's capitalizing on that to be able to say, okay, we have COVID vaccines as well coming in. How do we integrate that into routine immunization? And how do we integrate routine immunization into the whole campaign, not only countering COVID, but measles and other diseases, preventable diseases in the country. There is the negative side, education. If you look at education, the out-of-school children, it's only increased from the number of out-of-school children have decreased from 26% down to 24% at primary school level. That's not a change basically at all. It's not statistically significant.
Just a 2%.
Yeah, variation. But we also know at the same time it has increased to 10.2 million children are now currently out of school at the primary school level. When you go to include junior secondary and secondary, that goes up to 18.5 million. And we've discussed this very figure before. Now, the figures themselves don't matter. But what's happened with COVID is the number of children going to school has dropped out perhaps more than would have been planned or expected. But in so doing, the government have also at the same time developed other strategies to counter that. So the radio, digital learning, has increased the number of programs on the radio station, especially at state level, that accommodate learning, whether inside the classroom or outside the classroom. The Learning Passport, which you yourself helped us launch a year ago, about a year ago, just under a year ago, 14,000 of documents of the curriculum have been downloaded onto an iOS and onto an app. People can look at that. So the accelerated learning offline or online and digital has increased as a result of COVID, but the impact of COVID has meant the number of children going to school or out of school has also increased at the same time. So there are opportunities and threats that these figures, the multi-indicator cluster survey, help us to say, okay, have we accelerated immunization as much as we wanted to? No. How can we capitalize on other things? In education, has it meant that more children are out of school? Yes, it has. So what measures can we put in place to increase the number of children, whether they're in school or out of school, can continue their learning?
Mr. Lutade, that takes us to the next question, which, of course, you know, when you do a survey, there is usually a sample size. What is the sample size, or what has been the sample size for each round, and particularly so for round 6, the one that is just been concluded and we are expecting to be released anytime soon?
So let me talk more on the recent one.
Yes.
Yes. In every state, we took a sample of 50 enumeration areas. And in each of the enumeration areas, we sampled 20 households. So looking at that 50 enumeration areas per state, which means throughout the country, we were able to sample 1,850 enumeration areas. And if you now look at, if you now multiply this figure by 20, because I said we pick 20 households in each of the enumeration area, this will give us 37,000 households. But after this,
that means that every state and the FCT was covered.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but after that, if we look at, we say mixed NICS. So because of the NICS aspect of this survey that has to do with immunization, so we now saw that this sample size was not adequate enough to capture some of the NICS indicators in some of the states, to be precise, 20 states. So we now sampled 337 more enumeration areas. But these 337 enumeration areas were spread across those 20 states, depending on the actual number needed more in each of those states to have for a very adequate sample size. So at the end, we were able to sample 2,187 EAs, and that is if we had that 337 plus 1,850 together. So in all, we sample 20 households in all these 2,187 enumeration areas. So at the end, nationally, we sampled 43,740 households for study. That's throughout the federation.
Do you consider that large enough and adequate?
Very, very
for what for
very,
the purpose
very,
of this
yes,
exam?
very, very adequate enough to give us a robust estimate for each of the indicators for mixed NICS.
All right, let's look at this report, this latest one. When is it going to be put out, and who or what levels of government are going to be involved? 1, 2, how long did it take to carry out this last survey?
So it's taken us about a year, just over a year from beginning to end. The delay from the last multi-indicator cluster survey is because of COVID, but it took us about 1 year, a bit more of a year. The custodians, as I said, the body is the National Bureau of Statistics. The Statistician General is the one who owns the data. The Statistician General has distributed that to all the ministries. All the line ministries have the existing data. It's also, as my colleague has very quite rightly said, the immunization side, the NICS side, is an important component to it. This was supported by both the Bill and Melinda Gates and the Gavi, so they're using the data now to look at issues, for example, like zero-dose children, how many children have had no immunization at all. And then the next step is to distribute it to each of the states, so each state have their own data, own that data, and use that data. The key, and I think this is behind your question, who is going to use that data and how do we hold them to account for that? This is where the National Bureau of Statistics comes in. They're the owners of this data for the government and on behalf of the government. So they will work with each of the line ministries, with our support obviously, to ensure that each of the line ministries have a good understanding and analytical backdrop of the data. So the Ministry of Education in terms of education, the Ministry of Health, and the health indicators, and so on and so forth. Many of the indicators, though, have multi-disciplinary aspects to it. Health is not just purely health, immunization, for example, there's sanitation, there's water, there's education. All of these are contributing factors. And that's where the challenge comes from. And this is where I think the international community, alongside the government, can work at national level and at state level to ensure that the integration of that data, both in itself and into things like multidimensional poverty, other surveys and analytical tools that allow government, whether at national level, but most importantly at state level, to look at policies and investments that will really give them a return that is critical. There are two areas I think I would like to highlight. First one is on birth registration. Birth registration has increased from 47% to 57% roughly across the country. That's significant and it's good. But the number of births in that time far outweigh that increase, and that's what we have to look at. But the importance of birth registration, it's not in itself, it's a right for a child, the unique identity of a child. To become a statistic, they need to become a register at birth. The implications of that is on immunization, is on enrollment and education, is on their protection going forward in the rest of their lives. So it's not a significant thing for any of us today or tomorrow, but for that child, it's their fundamental right to get a unique identity. The disparity among states, in Lagos I think it's something in the region of 90%, in other states it drops down to 23%. Those disparities mean you start to get what you might call geographical rights-based issues. So, you know, your postcode in other countries we call it your postcode, where you are born defines how much of a right that you have. The second area is on nutrition. Now, wasting and stunting in Nigeria is a big issue. We've got rates of stunting between 30% and 42% in some places. We've got wasting up to 17.9% in some places. I've just visited Sokoto, where wasting is very, very, very high. But what are the indicators that lead to, say, reducing stunting? One of the key indicators is about breastfeeding, exclusive breastfeeding and breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth. Those indicators, breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth has dropped from 43% down to 33%. That indicates that there is a problem of how we care for mothers and their newborns immediately after birth. Exclusive breastfeeding, which is institutionalized based, has increased, and that is good. It's a good indicator. So we've got to look at both institutionalized birth and non-institutionalized birth, especially for those in rural areas where it looks as though the breastfeeding is within the first hour has reduced considerably. So the institutionalized birth is working, exclusive breastfeeding, but the non-institutionalized birth, we need to invest a lot more time to get the rates of stunting down significantly. You know, these rates of between 30 and 40% are unacceptably high for a country whose human capital is being progressed now and will be the future of this country, and they need to be given the better basis for.
That is to say that breastfeeding is very key to the to the development of the child.
Absolutely, it's the most crucial part. Micronutrients as a child, 0 to 1, is the most important factor in their own cognitive and physical development. And then Nigeria is in a good place to be able to do that, but needs the right level of investment in maternal care, in food supplies, and micronutrient supplementation. It doesn't cost much. It's 6,000 naira per child. That's all it is. It's over $60 per child for treatment for wasting. So you look at per treatment, and that's only per treatment. So you've got the disparities which are enormous. Let's invest in prevention. That's what I would say to every single governor. invest in your child, give them supplementation that they required 0 to 1, and then you'll be in a much stronger position going forward.
And of course, mothers need a lot of nutrition to be able to properly breastfeed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
okay,
that's
Mr.
the key.
Lutade, quickly, I know the MBS was at the driver's seat of this survey, of this whole process. But were there other collaborators? Were there other people, other institutions
Yes.
that assisted with this survey across the country?
Yes.
Did you, for instance, get some assistance from, say, the relevant institutions at the state level?
Yes. There are other stakeholders that participated in the production of this last round of mixed data. For instance, every state statistical agencies, they were part of the whole process. Then Minister of Education were part of it. Minister of Health, they were part of it. National Planning, they were part of it. We have many stakeholders that participated in this round of mix. And before I forget, the National Primary Health Care, Development Care, they were also part of the stakeholders that produced this last round of multiple indicator cluster survey. So it was not only MBS affairs. We were able to carry other relevant stakeholders along in the production of the data.
You know why I asked that question is simply because of what he said earlier on. That is, owning this process after the report is released, for instance. If there are no institutions at that level to own this data and the process, it will be futile. We are in a country where not much premium is placed on data and is used for government policy formulation and implementation. So are you positive that these institutions that have been part of this survey would be able to drive this process, particularly to the grassroots?
I absolutely believe that they are going to do that, because from the beginning of the whole process, we carry them along. I remember 2020 when we started the whole process, because it was COVID that delayed this round to this level. So right from when we started the survey design workshop, we carried all these people along. And for every activity that we have embarked on in the production of this data, we have always been carrying these all these stakeholders along. So I strongly believe that taking the data to the grassroots by these people will not be a problem. I'm very sure that they will be ready and are available to take the data to the grassroots.
All right, let's take a short break. When we return, we'll be looking further at the implementation of this report when it is eventually launched. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Mr. Hawkins, I'd like to extend that last question to you. We in Nigeria, as it were, proud to this time, do not place so much emphasis, so much premium on data. But I believe that is beginning to change, but not much of it is still out there. Now, this is the data that has been carefully collected, analyzed, and put together by the NBS in collaboration with the other agencies of government that they have been working with. How impactful do you think these data would be in addressing some of these issues that it deals with, particularly the SDGs at every level?
I think very important, and the first and foremost is the ownership, as you quite rightly have pointed out, and the fact that MBS owns it and is the body that produced it is indicative of how much Nigeria has moved forward. MPS 20 years ago was figment of many people's imagination, and it's really developed as an institution and as a technical center of excellence. And things like Mix, and especially Mix 6, has contributed towards that. And there are further, Mix Plus will come in, and there are further other programs of this nature which help develop MBS's own capacity, both at national level and at state level. Secondly is about the interpretation of it and the use of it. As my colleague has quite rightly said, all the ministries, the line ministries, have been involved. All of them have a degree of ownership. And then I think it's up to all of us, every single one of us, to use the data to inform policy, to inform decision making. Truth to power. This is a political program that we're talking about. Truth to power is the most important thing. Facts and figures do not lie. They can be used to ensure that people address the more important things. Politics is about prioritization. How do the politicians in power prioritize their investments, and what are the data that they can use to be able to do that? But at a technical level, I think it's the data of this kind is incredibly important to make the technical decisions and technical adjustments, as I said, around stunting and wasting and nutrition. How do you make those technical decisions to ensure that your investment has a bigger impact on what you are trying to do? And that is crucial. But there's a social element to it. And one area that we haven't talked about, but we need to talk about, violent discipline. What happens in the home? What happens in the classroom? What happens on the streets? When a child does something wrong, we all do. We're all children at one point. We all do something wrong. We learn from the things that we've done wrong. How do you respond to that? 90% of the children said that they had experienced some form of violent discipline. About a year ago, we did a global survey. Nigeria came out as 83% of the children felt really pressurized to achieve those two things. So the social dynamic, people themselves, parents, communities, teachers, need to understand that positive discipline is good, negative or violent discipline has a detrimental effect and does certainly not address the corrective nature when a child does something wrong. Think about it, absorb it, and see how you can look at discipline. There's nothing wrong with discipline. How you enact that discipline to change society to a more positive way of thinking.
One other indicator that we have not addressed or we have not spoken about sensibly, which is one of the 10 key indicators in Mix 6, has to do with child labor.
No.
What was the finding of the survey as far as child labor is concerned?
There's a drop in child labor across the board. I think it's something like 33% down to 23%. I can't remember the exact figure, but there is a drop, a marginal drop in child labor. But that is not an indication that Nigeria has child labor under control, because there are different types of labor that is enacted, and the difference between girls and boys is pretty profound in many of these situations, especially around domestic labor and so on. But the trajectory is good. Let's be positive and let's build on that. But where child labor is happening and how it is being shown as a figure relies on many other aspects. It's a bit like immunization, where the figures might be good, but zero-dose children are not seen as a group of children unvaccinated. Child labor is very much the same. So the indicator is good, but there are pockets, and I'm sure in places like Lagos and Ogun State, these pockets are quite large, and we need to find those pockets. So the indicator's good, it's dropping, well done, but let's now look at those children who are not a statistic, who are subject to child labour, in mines, in farms, on other areas there where children might be used as labour.
It's interesting to know that the indicators show that child labour is dropping against the backdrop of a global economic downturn,
Yes.
Where more and more parents are putting their children to doing all kinds of labor that will bring in some measure of income. Is it not surprising?
No, it is.
That decline.
And this is why I keep raising the fact that it's the first survey since the outbreak of COVID. And there has been progression, so good progression. So if COVID hadn't happened, or maybe the impact of COVID is less than we thought it might have been, that progression would have been even more. So there's something right with the policies. There's something right with how things are working here. The main thing, though, is that the demographic is going to overtake the percentage. So Nigeria has to do even more. So a 10% increase over the past 5 years, 4 years, is good. Let's celebrate that. But it needs to be 20, 30% if Nigeria is ever going to catch up with itself and be able to look at the SDGs in a way that, because if Nigeria succeeds with SDGs, the rest of Africa will succeed. At the moment, it doesn't look as though in 12 of the 17 SDGs whether Nigeria will achieve the SDG. It doesn't look like it. Even if you invest billions tomorrow, it will not achieve it because of this issue of demographics and the increase in population. But it can seriously still contribute to the achievement of SDGs. And these figures show the trajectory is in the right direction, but the speed of which we will get to, we won't get it by 2030. Can we get it to 2035? Can we get it to 2040? And all of this is within the backdrop that the demographics is increasing the pressure on Nigeria.
Mr. Lutade, between round 1 and round 5, before this last survey, did we witness any positive changes with these data generated in terms of implementation? And I ask that against the backdrop of the fact that this survey, this cluster survey, is across 36 states and the FCT. The level of compliance, would you say, is the same or is acceptable in every state of the Federation?
I will say there is a positive change. For example, the area of breastfeeding, just as you mentioned, especially exclusive breastfeeding, those that is from the age of 0 to 6 months, there is an increase in this in the rate of children that are exclusively breastfed compared to the previous rounds of the survey. Then birth registration too, there is also increase in the total number of children that their births were registered in this round of mix 6 compared to the previous one. Then if we look at the use of internet too, that has increased. And even if we are looking at use of internet, you can even attribute that one to one of the effects of COVID. You know, it was during this COVID period that people started online meetings. So there is increase in the use of internet in this round of mix. Then if you come to immunization, looking at Penta, so you discover that we discover that there is also an increase too. That is, children that received the 3 dose of Penta immunization. So there is also improvement in this. So just this few, at least, it shows that there is the positive progress.
Yes. Now, in round 5 or in the 5th round, for instance, you adopted the computer-assisted personal interviewing devices, CAPI. Now, were you at any point having any issues, say maybe inhibitions in terms of cultural and religious inhibitions in the different states where you went? Because You know, in some of our places, they are so cultural, so religious, that anything, any innovation that comes along, the tendency is to resist it. In carrying out this survey, did you encounter any such?
No, there was no restriction due to either cultural belief or any tradition. The only challenge in that area was this insecurity. You know, there are some places, once they see something like this, it will just catch their attention. And if care is not taken, before you know it, you might be attacked and they might collect that copy. So, but we were able to manage the situation because during the data collection, we were able to hire services of a guide that were guiding these interviewers to each of these enumeration areas. So with that, we were able to overcome that. But in terms of cultural belief or traditional belief, no, we didn't have any challenge. The only challenge was the area of insecurity in the country.
Is that also beginning to fade with immunization? Because you know that in terms of immunization, there were also inhibitions in terms of religion and cultural beliefs at one point in time. Have we overcome that completely?
Yes, we believe that there is improvement with the current results, maybe due to government enlightenment. You know, government has embarked on different programs now to educate women on the reasons why they should take immunization for their children. I want to believe that that is working, because going by what we have now, there is improvement in the immunization taken by the children compared to the previous survey.
So CAPI was also adopted for the round 6?
Yes, CAPI was adopted.
All right. Mr. Hawkins, finally, let's get your advice. What would you be telling governments at local level, state governments, and even the federal government on the utilization of the findings of this Mix 6?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I think it's opportune to congratulate MBS, the Bureau of Statistics, and the Statistician General himself for the production of these figures. I mean, Mix 6 is a very complex thing to develop. The numerators went out at a very difficult time in some very difficult situations. So the fact that we have got multi-indicator survey 2021 in its current form, in such a brilliant document, MBS needs to be congratulated. Secondly, the government as a whole, especially the ministers of finance, budget and planning, both the federal minister and the state ministers, who both really own this and really want to take this forward. So what I would say, both to MBS and to the Minister of Finance, Budget and Planning, is talk about this at every time that you meet with any of the ministers, any of the EDs of agencies who are working on it. Always look at the evidence base before you look at the policy. At state level, I think we've got a big challenge ahead of us to make sure that the data is disaggregated down to the state level and populated at state level. I go to the states a lot. The good thing about states is they want the data. They're asking for it. I was in Sokoto last week. They were asking, when am I going to get the mix and the NICs? Not only do I want the 21 mix and NICs, but can you tell me when the next one's going to be so I can make that comparison and I can start planning now on how to react to this one and then be able to see whether I've achieved it at the next one. There is an interest and there's a want. We have to create that demand. So tomorrow is the launch. It's exciting, it's fantastic, but after tomorrow, using it in everything that you do, whether in policy or decision making or budgeting, use it all the time. And I think our biggest challenge is making sure we get it down to state level, especially in this period where they're distracted by other things.
All right, so Mix 7 will be in 3 years' time.
Will be.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Peter Hawkins is a UNICEF representative in Nigeria, joined of course by Adeyeye Lutade, who is the head Household Statistics Division of the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. Well, they are the owners and drivers of the process that's talking about the cluster survey, multiple indicator cluster survey, Mix 6, which is up for a launch tomorrow. That's Tuesday. And great. So we look forward to having a comprehensive report, and we can engage with it and see how that can be broken down up to the grassroots level for implementation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. We'll see you again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.